have to start with Rachel Thomas, and Justin Trudeau was asked about the mass layoffs at Bell Media the other day. The newsrooms were slaughtered, right? There was almost 5,000 people laid off. And Rachel Thomas says, Trudeau seems a little cranky. The Bell layoffs are largely a result of his legislation, both C11 and C18, and his attempt to make mainstream media dependent on the state. A media revolution is long past due. The government needs to get out of the way and let journalists and media outlets function independently. Well, I mean, the other thing they need to do is stop censoring YouTube, right? Like there's mass censorship going on, still mass censorship going on, targeted censorship, like on Twitter as well, across the entire Canadian internet infrastructure. Anyway, back to this. Mike says the tantrums we throw when the tires start to fall off our state-funded propaganda machinery, right? I'll show you what Justin Trudeau says in a minute. I just want to read the responses here. Michelle Ferreri, who's also an MP, Rachel Thomas is an MP, Michelle is an MP. She says, how do you not laugh at this human? He forced their hand, but now he says it's garbage. He's actually diabolical. Make a corporation dependent on you and then pass legislation, C11 and 18, that destroys them. So my question in watching this clip is, what is Doug Ford smelling to make that face? Don't say anything, it's the Prime Minister. So Justin Trudeau is asked about this. The whole time he's making that face. Here we go.
On the Bell Canada layoffs of 4,800 people across the country, your Heritage Minister accused Bell Canada of breaking its promise to invest in local news after receiving $40 million in regulatory relief funding. What is your view of that company's layoffs, and what is your commitment to future government support with that company?
I'm furious. This is a garbage decision by a corporation that should know better. We've seen over the past years journalistic outlets, radio stations, small community newspapers bought up by corporate entities who then lay off journalists, change the offering, the quality of offering to people. And then when people don't watch as much or engage as much, the corporate entity says, oh, see, they're not profitable anymore. We're going to sell them off. This is the erosion, not just of journalism, of quality local journalism, at a time where people need it more than ever, given misinformation and disinformation, but it's eroding our very democracy. Our abilities to tell stories to each other of how people's lives are, stories that reflect our own communities and not, central offices in our biggest cities, is part of what binds this country together from coast to coast.
The funny thing is, he's advocating for something that sounds great, right? Very flowery and roses and all the rest of it. But it didn't exist. It didn't exist. The people who are printing the news are printing a very curated, carefully selected liberal propaganda ragmag from front to back. Diversity is our strength. Here's a bad white person, right? Oh, some crime happened by someone, right? Can't tell you who or what they look like or anything, but yeah, some crime happened, and oh, maybe somebody died. The victim's name, we can't let you know that either. So, I mean, he's talking about something that may have existed at some point in Canadian media landscape, but not recently. Not close to yesterday. No, he's talking about something long dead, and he's mad that he made an investment and now the investment didn't pay off. And he put it all on red. And when it came up black, he went to the podium and said, darn you for doing this to me. How dare you do this to me, you news industry. Paraphrase. So Mike said the same thing. I've already read that. I think it's interesting. Everybody's kind of pointing and laughing at Justin Trudeau and saying, you did this, and also you should have seen this coming. And again, when you undermine an industry by making them print propaganda for money, for government money, and I've talked about this before, if your subscription base, let's say, is $10,000 a month, which is very respectable. That's a wonderful subscription base to have, $10,000 a month. The Toronto Star would love to have that. And the government's offering you $100,000 a month to print what they tell you to print. Well, you're going to take the subscriptions and the $100,000 they'll tell you. You've got now $110,000 a month. You see? And so who's the bigger customer? Paying the subscription payers or the government? The government. And if the government calls you up and says, that piece on whatever is not so good, you say, yes, sir. Sir, yes, sir. You want me to jump how high? Yes, sir. Make sure that check doesn't bounce or anything like that. Who am I kidding? You're the government, right? So they did this to themselves. And when the newspapers just aren't profitable at all, and they have to cut all their shows because even with the money coming in from the government, it's not enough anymore. Well, whose fault is that? The government's. They incentivize the behavior. So they got more of it. Jagmeet Singh is responding to this too. He says the Trudeau government gave $40 million to Bell without a jobs guarantee. You want a jobs guarantee too? Bell fired 9% of its workforce, closed newsrooms, and line the pockets of their stakeholders. We have to confront corporate greed in this country, not bankroll it like the Liberals and the Conservatives are. So Jagmeet Singh and his shadowboxing, his imagined enemies, he's propping Trudeau up. He's allowing Trudeau to be able to maneuver the way Trudeau is maneuvering. And then he sits on Twitter and pretends like he's opposed to it. It's laughable. And people are noticing. Here is a quick little snippet from Blacklock's reporter talking about the CRTC and the amount of trust in news media. So Blacklock's reporter says, slipshod, biased, and untrustworthy. Only 30%, 36% or something like that of Canadians believe Canadian news media, and that's appalling. Like, that's very bad. Here is just this snippet.
So who put this study together?
This is interesting. This is the Canadian Radio, Television, Telecommunications Commission, the CRTC, and they asked people, what do you think of media, and where do you get your news, and how reliable do you find it? And the findings were particularly gruesome. What did they say? Well, they said that fewer Canadians agree the information they get from news media is trustworthy. Only 36% said they actually trust newsrooms. Only 36% said they like the range of perspectives. They suspect there's bias. These are terrible numbers. And only 37% said they're satisfied with the quality of information and analysis. So, in other words, slipshod, biased, and untrustworthy. How's that for the trifecta of failure?
So this is the CRTC. So we're not talking about, this would exclude print media. We're talking about radio, television, digital media, perhaps?
Oh no, this includes newspapers.
Oh, it does.
Sure. They covered the waterfront. Sure, whatever you had in mind. This was intensive polling by a professional research company, Ipsos Limited. What they were paid $115,000. So that's some survey, and this was general impressions of media, and this followed.
So interesting, right? Interesting stuff. People don't trust government paid for propaganda. And Justin Trudeau's pining away for local media, telling Canadian stories. The people who do that, like me, get removed from social media, get silenced because I say, there's no possible way that what they're saying is true. There's no possible way for it. And then I get in trouble for spreading misinformation and disinformation, which is nonsense. I mean, trouble, I use the word loosely. They try and silence me. That's trouble, right? I'm being sent to the digital principal's office, so to speak. Although there's no criminal code. There's no, you're removed for 2 years. You can't monetize for this period of time. Like, I've been demonetized from YouTube forever for saying the vaccine isn't tested, can't be safe and effective, so on and so forth. And that's a removing offense forever, even though now we know that I was right. Sure. Makes perfect sense. National Post. Let's talk about race very quickly because this has to do with, you know what, this can wait. We'll talk about Ukraine. We have to talk about Ukraine. This will be in the government area. Ukraine. First, Boris Johnson is reacting to the Putin interview, and he's saying Putin's a liar. So obviously Putin's lying. Here we go. Here's Boris Johnson.
Around the world, people are watching that ludicrous interview with Vladimir Putin conducted by Tucker Carlson, and we must not fall for this tissue of lies, above all for the notion that Putin is somehow fated to succeed in Ukraine. On the contrary, he is doomed to fail. Read about it in the Daily Mail.
Can you imagine if after Frost Nixon, everybody came out and said, that Frost guy, he was such a, I guess they wouldn't have a British accent, right? They'd be Americans attacking Frost Nixon. But they wanted to take Nixon down. Still, the whole idea that they can just undermine what Vladimir Putin said by saying, it's ludicrous. I didn't touch any buttons there. By saying, it's ludicrous, is kind of, that is very arrogant. Right? They think that they've got everything under control. Everything's in the palm of their hand. They can just dismiss it, right? Whatever Vladimir Putin says and Tucker Carlson, right? They make a face, they say it's ludicrous, and then he says, read about it, right? And he sounds all authoritative. Here is citizen journalists, and citizen journalists say Putin is not lying. 26/11/23, Natalia Mosaic, I'm getting that wrong, interviewed David A., leader of Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. Quote, when we returned from Istanbul, Boris Johnson came to Kiev and said that we will not sign anything with them at all, and let's just go to war. Oh, you can hear this. The translation is here, but it's all in Ukrainian, I guess. Russia were ready to enter the war if we accepted neutrality like Finland once did, and we would make a commitment that we would not join NATO. When we returned from Istanbul, Boris Johnson came to Kiev and said that we will not sign anything with them at all, and let's just go to war. And as soon as we called them to sit down and negotiate, the Russians will form a delegation the next day waiting for us. The Russians were ready to enter the war, or to end the war if we accepted neutrality. Okay, so that's just the clip on repeat. So Boris says that's ridiculous, and Putin says this is what happened, and Zelensky's guy says this is what happened. So here's that part as well.
Mistake.
Sorry, I thought it was queued up, but it is not. Sorry, it's not queued up, and I don't have time to have a look for it, so apologies about that. Rebel News shows Justin Trudeau being asked about the Putin interview, and he says, that whole thing, propaganda, Russian propaganda, nothing more. Here we go.
You've been such an ardent supporter of Ukraine, but there's been a lot of controversy surrounding President Zelensky's visit here, and now we've heard Vladimir Putin use some of that embarrassment in an interview with Tucker Carlson. How does it feel to know that that visit and your office's role in inviting a former Nazi to a reception is creating hardship for an ally?
Vladimir Putin chose to invade a nation.
So the question is, how do you feel about your actions of inviting a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament, that impact on a foreign leader? And he pivots to Vladimir Putin's a war criminal, basically. An aggressive, expansionist war criminal. And that just ain't true.
Neighboring sovereign country, violating the rights, the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and violating the rules-based order that underpins the safety, the security of all of us living in democracy, in free democracies around the world. He will, of course, use whatever propaganda he can engage in. But I can tell you, Canadians will not be fooled. Canada stands with Ukraine, not just because we are friends to Ukraine, but because the rules-based order and the system of laws and the UN Charter protect all of us, not just Ukrainians. So we will continue to be there with Ukraine for as much as it takes, for as long as it takes. Unfortunately, we see the lengths to which Russian propaganda will go to try and impact public opinion, to try and twist things the way we want to.
Interesting, right? So Russian propaganda, nothing more. And I'm not going to answer your question about my impact on inviting a Nazi to the Canadian Parliament and giving him a standing ovation, especially, having somebody of Zelensky's background, right? And all that, because somebody was making a big, who was it? Putin. Putin said, Zelensky's a Jew. So he says, oh, this is unthinkable, right? If you believe the history that we've all been taught about the Second World War. But I have to tell you, after reading the newspapers about COVID and about climate change and about a whole bunch of other things, diversity is our strength, economic news with regard, like vis-a-vis the stability of our economy and all the rest of it, I have to tell you that I'm very skeptical that what I've been taught in school is accurate because of the level of propaganda just in our regular day-to-day interaction and what I know about the watering down of the education system from, say, 1950 to now. So I have to tell you, if you're not skeptical about what you've been taught, you should be. Here's Tucker Carlson talking about America being run by nutcases. He's talking about here how Russia's not expansion. It doesn't make sense for Russia to be expansionist. It's one of the biggest countries in the world. It doesn't have nearly enough people. Why would it want to invade Poland? Doesn't make any sense. Here's Tucker just talking kind of after the interview, thoughts and reflections and things like that. I thought it was interesting. It's 10 minutes. We're just going to listen to a minute in the middle here talking about what I was saying. Here we go.
He kept saying it. I don't know why he would say it if he didn't mean it. And of course, there is, as a matter of fact, there is evidence overwhelming that there was a peace deal or part of a peace deal or the beginning of peace talks, a settlement of some sort on the table a year and a half ago that the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, scuttled on behalf of the Biden administration and convinced Zelensky and the Ukrainian government not to enter into these talks. I mean, that's kind of an established fact. The Israelis were there. They revealed this. I mean, that happened. So, but Putin, for his part, again, even talking about Putin, you feel like I'm flacking for Putin. I'm from La Jolla, California, not flacking for Putin. Please. I'm just trying to assess this rationally. It's interesting that he's willing to say, yeah, I want some kind of settlement. And the final thing I'll say is that if you're wondering who the lunatics are, U.S. officials have said on the record and have said to me, and are telling a bunch of people that part of the terms have to be Russia giving up Crimea. And without getting into the whole history of Crimea, here are the facts. It's, the home of Russia's warm water fleet. It's got a Russian population. They had a referendum. It chose Russia. It's part of Russia. It's where Russian wine comes from. So you can like that or not like it, but the fact is Putin would go to war, nuclear war, if it came down to Crimea. So and by the way, Crimea was in Russian hands at the beginning of this war. So it's like, if you really think that a condition of peace is that Putin's going to give up Crimea, then you're like a lunatic. And they are. I mean, they want a weak leadership in Russia. And the question is, why would you want that? How is that good for the United States? I'm not defending Russia. I'm defending my own country. A weak central government in a nation with the world's largest nuclear stockpile is insane, especially a country as large and potentially.
Right. And it just keeps going. Sorry, he was talking about the Russia expansionism just before when I queued it up, like 5 minutes to 6 minutes. He's talking about expansionism and talking about bringing up the peace deal in Ukraine. Like, I don't want Leningrad. I don't want Poland. I don't want Lithuania. I don't want any of the tangential places. They're free to do whatever they want. They're their own independent states, and I'm not interested in invading them. But this is like Ukraine is the NATO situation, Boris Johnson's influence, the West arming Ukraine, so on and so forth. These things make Ukraine different, but Russia is not expansionist. They're not interested, according to Putin and Tucker Carlson, in expanding their territory. So anyway, here is what's happening in Ukraine after the Tucker Carlson interview. There are people in the streets, and Liz says, Zelensky, get out. In Kiev, people have gathered on the Maidan, demanding the return of Zelensky and the resignation of Zelensky. I wonder how many of these people watched the Tucker Putin interview. So, and it's growing apparently, this crowd of protesters. So, is it going to lead to Zelensky stepping down? I mean, there's a lot of money behind this, and money is momentum. And when you have that kind of momentum, like, okay, think about it like a poker game. And sometimes if you're playing poker, you could fall in love with your cards, or you might not like your cards so much, but you have so much money in the pot that any further bet you're almost committed to, because the pot is so big that you have so much money in there that you can fall into that trap, right? And so Zelensky is, people have so much money expecting a return to rebuild Ukraine, expecting a return to, further finance more weapons and things like that. They're expecting money back. Like, you're expecting to win the pot. Like, that's why you pay to see the next card, right? On the turn, right? If it's like, another 800 or 900 or whatever, you're like, pot committed, man. I've got to see that last card. I've got to see if I make my hand. I mean, I've got my hand and I just want you to put more money in the middle. And it seems like the powers that be are pot committed with Zelensky, and they need him to continue to be doing what he's doing regardless of what his people want, just like in Canada, right? Just like Trudeau. Here's Colin Rugg, I've already shown, maybe I've shown this. Tucker Carlson calls U.S. officials lunatics and poisonous morons. Yeah, so the Tucker after the interview is interesting so far. Again, like, do you think that Boris Johnson is going to be held responsible by people, or is the Hunter Biden laptop defense going to work this time? Right? Just ignore it and hope it goes away. Like, these people seem to be able to do that. Here's the Liberals, and they're campaigning because there's a by-election happening very soon. And the Liberal Party says people and families in Durham need a local champion, and that's Rock Durham. He'll be their strongest voice in Ottawa to deliver real results for the community, right? So the Liberals are there, and Justin Trudeau's got like headliner status coming to rally for this by-election. And again, they're putting a lot of stock in this. It seems like they need a win. And if the Conservatives win the seat, they're going to crow about how the Liberals are done. And if the Conservatives win the seat, the newspapers will talk about, you know, Pierre Poilievre being inevitable. And if the Liberals win, then there'll be attack pieces on Poilievre and the Conservatives not able to win a seat in a Liberal riding, blah, 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 blah. Because I think this is held by a Liberal currently. Justin Trudeau again says, Durham, meet your Liberal by-election candidate, Rock Durham. He's worked, volunteered, blah, 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 blah. So they're posting pictures of rallies and things like that. The place that they held the rally is, according to the pleb, getting hate backlash. Hate speech is wrong. Hate backlash on their social media. So they posted a picture of them hosting Justin Trudeau, and then everybody didn't like it. And people said, you know, F you and F him, basically. And so Brewer's Pantry said, last night we had the honor of hosting the Prime Minister of Canada at the Brewer's Pantry. Uh-oh, I know where this is going. He came to Bowmanville to support the Robert Rock campaign. Our venue was asked to host as we are welcoming to all and supportive of our community. Our support of small batch Ontario beer and craft beverages was highlighted many times leading up to and during the event. Our pride was overflowing, and we posted a picture last night to share with our pantry family. Since the post, we've received an incredible amount of hatred from our so-called community. People that have never supported or visited us before, of course. We've received hundreds of hate comments on our social media, dozens of negative Google reviews, countless offensive emails, phone calls at all hours of the night. I'm not political. I'm not a politician. I do not have a thick skin. These are comments about my business that I'm passionate about and very proud of. So, like, if you're not political, maybe you shouldn't host the Prime Minister. And I'm not condoning people calling people with hate messages and things like that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, fundamentally, if you think you're not political and then you host the Prime Minister, welcome to the political arena. You might not like it, right? And so, lesson learned, right? Like, but it's weird to blame Canadians for being ticked off about a prime minister who lies so effortlessly and who manipulates and schemes and uses every trick in the book to hold on to power. And I mean, I like Jagmeet even less, right? Like, holy smoke. So I'm not surprised people are upset. I'm not surprised people are engaging in all sorts of behavior to express their displeasure, because the usual way to express your displeasure in a democracy is to vote the bum out. But people are not allowed to vote the bum out, and they're not even really allowed to publicly complain about it. So what are they going to do? They're going to find an outlet and let off steam, and that's what they do. So there you go. And Justin Trudeau has set this up, and the reason he set this up and the why for all of this is Trudeau wants to use this and say, see, they're hateful bigots, and then increase the fines for old stock Canadians, right? It's interesting, and it's terrifying because it's the same kind. Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful